Congressman, I do want to switch gears a little bit now to the IRS, which has definitely been in your crosshairs. What does a victory on that front for Republicans look like?
Yeah, let me tell you, this committee has not always been known for oversight. We have a subcommittee called the Oversight Committee. The Ways and Means Committee will be known for aggressive oversight. We need to look into aspects of the IRS and to make sure we get answers. Why was thousands of taxpayers' information leaked over a year ago? In the same week, this administration was trying to push policy changes that increase taxes on those same individuals. We need answers. We've only heard crickets from this administration. We're gonna get down to the brass tacks and figure out what's going on. We're setting up a whistleblower hotline so that any IRS employee can let us know of items that just don't smell right at the IRS so that we can hold the IRS accountable to the American people. If you talk to citizens throughout this country, they will tell you their most feared agency in government is the IRS. It shouldn't be that way. We need to hold the IRS accountable that they are working and delivering for the American people, not targeting them and not scaring them to death. And that is going to be a focus of our committee as well.
How would you make the IRS less feared by the American people specifically?
One way is to defund $80 billion and get rid of 87,000 IRS agents, which was the first piece of legislation that we took off the House floor. That was an initial campaign promise. We delivered on it, and we're going to continue to hold the IRS accountable. We need to make sure that the IRS is more viewed as an agency that helps the American people instead of one that targets them.
House Republicans, as you said, voted this week to cut nearly all of the $80 billion IRS funding increase Congress approved back in 2022. As you said, that was a campaign promise. But the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office said that this bill would increase the deficit by $114 billion. What's your response?
Yeah, Brittany, only in Washington, D.C., whenever you cut $80 billion that was appropriated 4 months ago, can you come up with a number that it's going to cost over $100 billion? Any American knows that the $80 billion increase to the IRS was passed last fall, just 4 to 5 months ago. And we are trying to reverse it. And then you have the congressional, quote, budget scorekeeper saying it's going to cost over $100 billion. That's Washington speak. That's Washington numbers. It's not real. And it's ludicrous for anyone to think that there's any realistic aspect to that score.
The CBO also estimated back in 2022 that the Inflation Reduction Act would have a, quote, negligible effect on inflation and could potentially nudge it upward. So was the office wrong then, too?
The Inflation Reduction Act does nothing for inflation. You cannot spend your way out of inflation. To pass a $745 billion piece of legislation saying that it's going to solve inflation, let's be serious about it, Brittany. That legislation was clearly about giving political gifts to all of the wealthy environmentalists that fund the Democrat Party. You look into the aspects of that. The Green New Deal items that was pushed through that made up the majority of it, it was nothing about reducing inflation. I'll tell you what Americans care about are the prices at the supermarket. They don't care about the prices at the stock market. The Inflation Reduction Act, the only thing it did was increase the stock prices for anyone who has some kind of green energy company. And that's what the Washington Democrats delivered. They did nothing about reducing inflation. In fact, we're still at a 40-year high months later.
I do want to touch on the Inflation Reduction Act. It had provisions regarding prescription drug price reform. Would these be provisions that you would vote to repeal?
We're very concerned about any kind of aspect of legislation that reduces the opportunity for us to get cures. Americans want cures for cancer. Americans want cures for all kinds of diseases that they're battling. We should never pass legislation that makes it more difficult to have cures for anything. And in fact, the provisions within the Inflation Reduction Act does that exact same item. It makes it harder for cures. You had numerous individuals that say that that's in fact what it did. What we need to do about healthcare, we need to promote innovation. We need to Uberize the healthcare system so it lowers the cost and increases cures. That should be the driving force in all policy that we push through Congress.
So to promote innovation, would you repeal those provisions?
Like I said, we are doing a bottoms-up approach. We're going to talk to real Americans to see how they have been affected by aspects within those provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act. I don't want to hear the folks in Washington, D.C. telling me what works and what doesn't. I want real Americans to tell me what are the answers, what are the solutions, and that's what we're going to work towards.
I do want to get back to the IRS. The Republican Party as a whole has had a pretty aggressive stance surrounding the agency, and there's even recent legislation to abolish it. Is that something you would support?
I mean, come on, Brittany. Let's be serious about this. What we have to do is to make sure we hold the IRS accountable. And that's what we're going to do. And rightfully so. Conservatives have a reason to be concerned about the IRS. Under the last Obama administration, we saw how the IRS targeted conservatives. We're not making it up. It's facts. The Ways and Means Committee, provided to the American public of the evidence that Lois Lerner was in fact targeting conservatives. So it's a real possibility. Why did Nikki Haley's donors get released? Non-for-profit donors that should have never been released. I want to know why that happened. Why did thousands of Americans' taxpayer information get released? I mean, this administration apparently care more about the president's classified documents that are in every garbage dumpster across America than they care about the Americans' taxpayer information themselves. And we can't have that. And we won't have that. And so we're going to hold the IRS accountable, and we're going to make sure that they are a neutral agency that is not a political arm of this administration, and that they are delivering for all American people and not targeting anyone.
Would you support the Fair Tax Act that was just introduced this week?
There's going to be a lot of discussion on that. And that's like what I said. It's going to be a bottoms-up approach, and people are going to have to look at the provisions and how we're going to move forward. So it's going to be a lot of great discussion, and I'm sure you'll love to follow it as we move along.